Welcome to Pineland Underground, the official podcast of the United States Army's John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School, and the best podcast the military has to offer.
Real, bold, and unrestricted.
We're your hosts, Sergeant Major Chuck Ritter,
Major Bobby Tuttle. Welcome to Pineland Underground. All right, welcome back to the Falcon Snail Pub. Another great episode of Pineland Underground. We're your hosts. I'm Bobby Tuttle.
I'm Sergeant Major Chuck Ritter.
And we're excited to have everybody tuned in this evening. Chuck, take us away. Who's on our show today?
All right, so we've got two awesome people here. I'm going to go ahead and go by the person that's here with us in person, which is Aaron Kraft. Go ahead and give a quick introduction to yourself, please, sir.
Name's Aaron Kraft. I'm a strength conditioning coach. I've worked with colleges for about 10 years, and I worked with tactical athletes for about the last 6.5 in different capacities.
And I've worked with Aaron for many years, probably since 2015, up until about now. He's been a personal trainer of mine on and off, and well-respected in the community and well-respected by me. And then dialing in from Austin, Texas, we have Jake Saenz. Jake, please give us just a little bit of intro, and I'll cover anything you don't hit.
Yeah, also a full-time strength and conditioning coach, just in the private sector. Been doing that since 2009. Worked with a couple of different companies before I started my own. And we got 2 locations here in Austin, Texas. A company that's called Atomic Athlete. So we've kind of been in and out of the community, teaching seminars and providing training and training guidance.
Yeah, I love it. Aaron, Jake, really appreciate you guys being on the show on behalf of the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center. Thanks for being our guests here on Pineland Underground. And we've got a great episode to dig into tonight.
Jake is also a former Ranger Regiment guy. He doesn't like to tell that story, but once upon a time. Long time ago.
I think me and Chuck went into the Army like within a month or 2 of each other. I just pulled the plug after 4 years, and he's still in it.
Yep. And he's got another military individual with him over there who was in the Navy, but we won't go any Navy stories here. They're kind of weird. All right, so let's talk about some mental and physical training. And one of the first topics we really want to get into here is selections. There's all different types of selections in the military, but in my opinion, from what I have observed or what I do observe, is they generally all have the same components of what they're testing for. And you can train for those things. I know, Jake, over there, you've trained a lot of guys and gals for selections and been highly successful, and so have you, Aaron. I want to start with the training for selections, not just one in particular, but let's talk about, for selections, like what are the main components that we see or that we think are within those? And I'll go over mine last. Aaron, I'll hand it over to you first, and then we'll go to Jake, and then go over to me and Bobby.
I mean, I know a lot of things that you'll go through, and I'm sure Jake agrees that there's a lot of foundational stuff that you talk about, strength values as far as your cardiovascular conditioning goes, metabolic conditioning, and you can talk into circuit training, whatever you'd like to call it. But a lot of the stuff that I actually get into with guys is the non-traditional training. So you can write the best strength training program, cardiovascular program that you can write for anybody that's put on paper. If they don't buy into what you're doing, they won't do it. So you're not going to get anything out of it. Yeah. And if you also don't apply things outside of the weight room, you're not going to get a lot of bang for your buck as far as applying it to what the actual selection is going to entail. So you can deadlift all day and you can have a great periodization program. But if you can't pick up something directly from the ground, if your mindset is that you have this many reps and you're going to do it in this amount of time, doesn't really relate all that much to the actual process going through it. So open training skills, I preach a lot as far as open-ended workouts when you're doing metabolic conditioning. So circuits that don't have a number of reps, it's how hard you push yourself, being able to work very specific areas. There's a lot of internal rotation with shoulders with guys in the military. So being able to pull yourself posturally back into position so you can be in a good posture while you run, while you ruck. It's really important for shoulder health. Backside strengthening, so your posterior chain. Butt, hamstrings, big one. So you can squat and deadlift, and it's great, but making sure that you get all the backside work in. So that's what's going to actually make you faster. It's what's going to allow you to propel yourself forward with strength and power, being able to jump, run, all of that kind of good stuff. But a lot of it, I would tell you, is that just building the program for me is building for the guy. So if the first thing I ask guys, I give them 5 questions in whatever selection they're going into, and they come back with me with these answers, and it's, how have you trained in the past? Because if I write you something that you don't like doing, so if you're an Olympic lifter and I don't put a clean or a snatch in there, you're not going to do the program. So I've wasted a lot of time to start off with. If you're a power lifter, you hate Olympic lifting, we don't have to do Olympic lifting. We can do a lot of stuff involving strength, power, mechanics that don't involve Olympic lifting. But it's kind of how the program, if you're a CrossFitter, if you're not, like, it just depends on how you like to train. So that's how I write the program. Then you have the traditional phases, and I won't bog it down. I'm sure Jake would love to talk about the traditional periodization phases of regular programming for 2 hours. I won't bog down in that as much as being able to tell you, like, there's specific things that I try and hit, especially the fundamentals, and I'll gloss over those a little bit to tell you about some of the, like, I do a lot of sandbag training from the ground, shouldering, carrying, loading. I would rather you load weird implements, and I would do it once a week, probably, depending on how heavy you want to go with it. And I applied as far as picking a sandbag from the ground as a different mechanic than deadlifting. So I teach a lot of stuff involving that, give you an opportunity to see the difference in mechanics. And I'll go into some of the teaching stuff we do that I actually worked on with my wife, building classes. But it's a little bit different than maybe you've seen in the past with some certain things if you've been coaching for a while that a lot of people are doing now, but I prescribe to highly. But I'll turn it over to Jake, let him talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I think Aaron hit the nail on the head with a couple of key points that I've written down as soon as you asked the question. It comes down to two aspects. You have metabolic conditioning, which is developing the aerobic base, and then having that transfer and kind of peaking that fitness for your assessments, because you don't test aerobic, capacity, but you test your 2 mile run, your 12-mile run, maybe your 5-mile run. So, two phases there. You got to build the base, and then you got to sharpen it, right? The muscular component is extremely important, not only for the assessments that you face. Typically, the assessments are going to be on paper, more muscular endurance, strength endurance, body weight movements. But when it actually comes to executing selection, like, everything goes out the window. You have logs, you have your buddies, you have odd objects, ammo cans, water cans, or whatever they're going to throw at you. So you have to transfer whatever you develop in the gym and in your training program and actually use it and transfer it in a way that's meaningful in selection. And I think one of the biggest things Aaron said was the idea of, will they actually do the program, right? So you can write the best damn program out there that, like, on paper looks like $1 million, but if that guy doesn't buy into it, or it's not the kind of program he's actually going to do it, then, I mean, it's wasting Aaron's time, it's wasting my time. So we always use the analogy at the gym. It's kind of like putting cauliflower in a kid's mashed potatoes. Like, you have to hit the necessary training requirements, right, in a way that whoever is executing that program will actually be like, buy into it and actually do it. Because you can have the best program written in the world, and it may be a 6-month program, but if you're only getting 20%, compliance, then they're not going to go anywhere. Then they're not going to actually build the fitness that's required. They'll probably end up doing preference-driven training, and it could be anything from CrossFit to excessive volume to, like, bias towards the upper body, anterior side of, chest and shoulders, the bench press, the beach muscles, And so, a lot of good points right there. Another aspect of that is preparing mentally as well, right? You can be a physical stud, but as soon as it gets cold, as soon as you get tired, as soon as you're not getting adequate nutrition or adequate sleep, I mean, everything can just go out the window. So sometimes you can find guys who are physically inferior, but have a lot of grit, and they can actually be very successful in a selection.
Awesome. So with selections, though, generally what I see is there's going to be some kind of test up front, whether it's an APFT, now it's the ACFT, and generally most of them add some kind of pulling, like pull-ups or something. And for our special operations selections, they're calling it the PFT, right? Because we're in this transition between the APFT and the ACFT, which is the Army Physical Fitness Test and the Army Combat Fitness Test. So as a stopgap, they just call it the PFT because we're not allowed to do
the physical fitness test.
It's so whatever. It was an old APFT, which is push-ups. It was push-ups, sit-ups, a 2-mile run, and then they added pull-ups in there. But you're gonna have some kind of test up front, and then the big thing is movement over ground with some type of weight, and then the ability to have the proper work capacity in a chronic manner to where you can do something hard and recover from it over and over again to where it doesn't wear you out and you get injured or you can't continue. Other than that, what have you guys seen for selections other than those things? That seems like the commonalities that I've observed. What have you guys observed? And we'll pass this one off to you first, Jake.
I mean, so I think there's those two things right there, your PFT and then your movement over ground. That often includes rucking. You shouldn't even go to
carrying really heavy shit over long periods of time and long distances.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you could say, like, there's a couple things on the front side of selection you have to do. You have to do your PFT and pass whatever the requirements are, maybe in the top 10% or score 90% or higher. and you have to be able to meet the ruck standard. But all the other aspects, physically speaking, of selection are a little more subjective. They're not like, it's not a graded criteria where either you passed or failed. It's just kind of like a wearing down of you, right? All the smoke sessions, the lack of sleep, the land nav courses back to back, the frustration around there, the uncertainty around all these different things. So you shouldn't even go to a selection unless you can actually pass those first two gates that you mentioned, Chuck, that movement over ground and then that PFT. Like, those should be easy. That should be the easiest part of your selection experience, to pass those two things, because that's just kind of like getting your foot in the door. And then the hard part begins, depending on how long the selection is, what the requirements are. Someone actually brought up a really good point in regards to the land nav idea. And they're like, well, I mean, how important is the land nav skill set? You know, I mean, are you actually out there with a compass and map and doing pace counts now in 2022? No. But what it does is it tests your ability to make decisions at nighttime by yourself.
Yes.
And it's a great tool to use for that criteria right there. It's like, hey, you know, you can't run nods, you can't run a headlamp. You're out there just stumbling around the dark, and let's see if you can.
Can't use the roads.
So,
you're out the
can't
woods.
use the roads, right? Yeah, can't handrail them too close; they'll get you for that. So,
to chime in to your first part real quick, here at the Special Warfare Center and School across Special Forces, Civil Affairs, and PSYOP selections, when you show up, just you know, kind of chiming in on your point there, is the very first thing that you do is a pretest. That is a physical fitness test. And you are not even considered a individual who showed up unless you pass those. And so those are absolute prerequisites. We do it here, but you don't even get to start selection until you pass that block. And so statistically, you haven't even showed up to the course yet until you've actually met that minimum criteria that you've known about, that's kind of advertised when you volunteer to come to a selection. And so just to kind of chime in there, that's a great point. And going back to the land nav too, though, you're alone, afraid. Long distances, stress is created. You know, stress is internally created because it's dark. You don't know exactly where you're going. Uneven, uneasy terrain. Long distances, typically 12 to 14 to 16 hours. Periods of darkness into the daytime. All the elements. And that's an ability for the cadre to look and say, hey, does this person have the ability to correct themselves, stay motivated, work through problem sets, work through scary banana spiders that are going to hit them in the face, or, you know, all the water obstacles, the draws, all those things that are out there. And so I just want to kind of chime in there, because I think you're hitting it home on some great points.
Yeah, I think, you know, so me and Aaron we specialize in fitness. I mean, that's only one aspect of it. You know, it's I know plenty of guys who are physical studs, but I want to go to combat with them, right? I know other guys who are just kind of like, you know, they're so you know, physically, but they got grit, they have mental resilience, you know, they're just fucking tough as nails. And I'd rather choose that guy and have like a lower PPT score on him than pick the guy who's, you know, scoring 300 plus, and it's kind of a Nancy. Once you get out there, you get wet and cold.
So you both have some experiences, like as the civilian sectors and your immense backgrounds working with athletes, you know, professional athletes, collegiate athletes, Olympic level athletes. And I would say that's complementary of a lot of the staffs and teams that we have throughout special operations that we attract and bring in to work with our soldiers in special operations. I want to ask real quick, you know, both of you guys, if you wouldn't mind chiming in, you know, what are some of the parallels or differences that you see as we talk about our military or tactical athletes and how they compare to the athletes, you know, in that kind of civilian sector in sports?
Physical fitness to me, I mean, however you want to look at it, whether it's strength values, power values, it's endurance values, whatever it may be, they're pretty consistent when you train for a specific value. What I would tell you that the similarities is, you know, muscles are muscles. Like, you train muscles, and there's movements that you train, there's exercises that you can use to train those movements. A lot of the stuff that I would tell you is that the open-ended aspect of things are a very similar thing. And my wife works with professional sports, so it's something I've seen up close with how she deals with people and how I kind of utilized the mental game to deal with people, is that you have to be able to do an open-ended skill and be able to dominate your area within your open-ended skill without knowing the end. And what I mean by that is there's a concept that she introduced me to 3 or 4 years ago that I preach a lot and I prescribe to greatly. It's called a 3-foot world.
Okay.
It's a guy I believe named Ken Ravizza came up with it originally. Now, this is, don't quote me on that. I may be wrong on the initiator of that one, but she's the one who told me about it. It's the idea behind no matter what you're doing in a physical testing, or if you're land navving, you're out in the middle of nowhere, you have a 3-foot bubble around you. And there's nothing in this world that matters in that 3-foot bubble but what you're doing and succeeding. So and the way she put it, and I'm sorry to curse on here, but she said, you dominate the fuck out of your 3 feet. Everything within your 3-foot bubble you control, so you can't be nervous because you control everything.
Dominate that 3-foot bubble.
And it applies to kind of training, and I've been working on it with deadlifting. To be honest, personally, I do strongman meets, so it's one of those things where it's weight lifted it matters. So if and that doesn't necessarily carry over to the special operations segment or tactical athletes, but if you look at it as far as any testing, written tests, physical tests, your 3 feet is in there. I've heard stories and been told stories of guys in selection processes who were physically capable, and like Jake was saying, walked up there, physically capable, came out for a push-up test, for instance, got 2 push-ups, fell apart because the clicker stopped going. Just melted and failed the physical test, even though they were fully capable of taking that physical test. I think that carries over from college athletics. What I worked with is that you'll see those guys all the time. I can remember a guy, I won't say his name, that is the prime example. I've never seen a better athlete. And I mean, the man was actually good looking too. He should have been a model.
Was his name Chuck Ritter?
It was close. It's between you and him, to be honest with you. Best male athlete I've ever seen.
Just got that face for radio.
Hey, so with that point right now, let's talk about readiness fitness levels, because we're talking about people that can't even show up and pass the minimum. I know there's a point of discussion in SWCS. They're like, oh, well, people keep showing them not being able to pass the sit-ups, so maybe we should get rid of the sit-ups, and I think they did. But the reality is, you know that's day one, so you know what to train for. So why are you training for preference and not for the things that you must train for versus the things that you want to train for? And I know, I mean, I'm not even looking at Jake's face right now. He's probably like, yeah, readiness fitness level, I want to talk about that. But between you and Aaron, let's hit that real quick. What you must train for versus what you want to.
Yeah, well, we think, okay, to the idea of selection and kind of what you see is, I mean, essentially selection is an interview in a way, right? It's like, hey, like, I want to try out for a team. And so, like, even compared to like the civilian world, when you're applying for a job, it's like, hey, I'm going to quiz you on A, B, and C when you come in. Then you come in and you have not studied A, B, or C. It's like, why would I hire you?
Yeah.
Like, why would I pick you if it was very clear, like, this is what you need to do to get here? And if you didn't even put that work in when you're trying to get the job, like, what kind of effort are you going to put in once you have the job, you know, and there's not any jeopardy? So that idea of like, if you're not showing up ready, like, hey, we told you up front, you can get on any website for any selection right now. Just Google how to be a Navy SEAL, how to be a Green Beret, how to, you know, training for Delta Force, what the fuck ever. You can Google that and find out a whole bunch of information. And so even, you know, Joe Blow in like, you know, bumfuck Louisiana could Google this and be like, okay, that's what I have to do to get ready. And that's what's going to happen when I show up. And if you show up and you're not prepared for that, why would they hire you? Like, why would they pick you to be on their team? I mean, I wouldn't pick you to be on my team if you did that to me. So I think people have this misconception of that, like, oh, you know, I'm good at this, I'm good at that. It's like, no, man, like, hey, you have to show up, you have to meet these requirements. And then you have to convince me through your actions, through these challenging things like land nav or extended ruck marches, whatever it may be, that like, hey, when the going gets tough, Aaron mentioned the open-ended event. You don't know if a firefight's going to last 5 minutes. You know, a baseball game most likely is going to be 9 innings, right? Or a certain duration. But you don't know what's going to happen if you're downrange. It could be 5 to 10 minutes, or it could be 5 to 10 hours. And so you have to have that adaptability. You have to be able to, you know, hold a little bit in reserve and understand that, like, hey, I don't know how long this is going to go. I need to pace myself appropriately, physically and mentally. I might need to take some tactical pauses and kind of get my shit together. But having that adaptability and resilience, I think, is extremely important.
Some of it, I think, is also, and what Jake's saying is perfect. And some of it, I think, the more people I've talked to, the more idea that I get that people are training to the standard and not to exceed the standard. And when they get there, if they're right on with the number that they need and something goes wrong, they're one short, they fail. That seems to be a problem with a lot of the tactical populations I've seen, is that they'll end up training to the exact number, and they'll get that exact number, and that's all they train to. So they're training to the test, if it's not training to exceed the standards.
So then you add a
test.
variable in there,
yeah,
that throws them off.
And it's, I mean, I've seen a lot of bad results from training to the standard, not to exceed the standard. And I'm not the guy that came up with that. Believe me, somebody has said that many, many times to me. over the years, but that's the one thing. And a guy I knew and for a long time used to tell me a lot of times is that, Aaron, no one ever won a war deadlifting 500 pounds.
It's true.
And I mean, you can deadlift 500 pounds, but if you can't do the requisite PT test when you get in there, so you have to train at the test, but you just can't train to the standard. You have to train to exceed the standard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Well, right now, there's a lot of poo-pooing on the APFT, right? And it is kind of, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the APFT, but the bottom line is it's a known metric that you have to do. So whether you agree with it or not, like APFT, ACFT, whatever assessment thrown at you, it's like, hey man, that's part of the hiring process. Like, if you're going to show up and you want to get hired and you want to be on this team, you got to do this. It doesn't matter how you feel about it, right? It's like, I'm sure there's all kinds of things that you guys have to go through as, Green Beret that you don't want to go do. Chuck's always talking about the little classes he has to go to, equal opportunity, sexual harassment, or whatever it may be. And it's like,
security awareness.
You go to yeah, it's like, hey, that's just part of the job, like I'm sure.
You don't have to love it. You just have to care about doing a good job. That's it.
Well, a famous guy once told me that he didn't want to get a haircut every week, but he joined the Army, so he had to get a haircut every week in an office one time.
You don't have to love what you're doing. You just have to care about putting your name on it and doing it well. You have to love it. Right?
Yeah.
What I'm going to chime in with what Jake's saying, though, too, is, you come to Special Forces, Civil Affairs, PSYOP selection. Again, you have to get invited to come. There's background screenings, There's an application process. You just show up. You have to volunteer and go through some vetting processes to get the invite to come. But when you get there, same thing with Ranger School, too. And I know, Jake, you can chime in on this, as well as Chuck, and is you show up.
I haven't been to Ranger School, but I'm giving you 2 officer points for just making shit up. Anyway.
You should go. At the age of 52, you probably wouldn't be the youngest guy to go, the oldest guy to go there. No, but you show up, but they stop you at the minimum standard. You perform the minimum standard, right? That is the invite to get there. And that is the gateway to entry to the rest of the selection course. They're not gonna get, they'll stop you at, whatever that minimum number of push-ups, sit-ups, 2-mile run. And that is your gateway to get in. Again, you do not have to be a physical stud to pass any of those courses. It's obviously highly recommended that you are you're physically sound and prepared. But there's so many other aspects to go in the selection process over that 10 days, 21 days, however long it is. Any kind of thoughts on that, Jake?
Well, a good thing to think about fitness is fitness is a buffer to all the other BS that you're going to experience, right?
Yes.
So the fitter you are, the less taxing land nav will be. The less taxing the smoke sessions will be. Like, just your perceived output per day is going to be lower than the guy who is unfit. Or even, let's just say, Aaron talked about meeting the standards. The guy who just barely meets the standard, right? You're doing the same work as he is, but he's like, wow, this is awful. And you're like, yeah, this is not that bad because I'm not close to my threshold yet of how much volume I can tolerate, right? So if you set that foundation early on, high training volume with proper recovery, then when you get to the selection, if you're more physically prepared than the other guys, even though it's not a fitness competition, it's definitely not what it is, but you just have that margin of hey, I'm a little more comfortable than the guy to my left and right, And so that's how I kind of look at it. Cause like I said, if you're a Green Beret, if you're a Ranger Regiment, SEAL teams, whatever it may be, then you're not a professional. You can be treated like a professional athlete, but the bottom line is you're not a professional athlete. You don't do sports for a living. You're a soldier. You're a professional, combat athlete. And so you have to be fit, but the bottom line is there's so many aspects to being a good soldier and a good Green Beret or a good guy in Ranger Battalion that, you have to have that aspect, but there's language, there's marksmanship, there's tactics, there's leadership. There's so much more involved.
Hey, so with that, we're talking about what you need to do. So Aaron and I have had long conversations, and you and I had long conversations about what I want to talk about now is defining what those things are. And what I think we agreed on once upon a time was, at a minimum, if you're going to be at least a Green Beret, we said the most important things are aerobic capacity, strength endurance, and then work capacity. Not saying that there's not other things that are out there, but those are the 3 things that are the most important. But I kind of want to talk about the definition of those things with you two and why they're important. So I guess let's hand this one over to Aaron first, and we'll hand over to you, Jake.
There's a continuum on those things to me too, and depending on who you are, you can be good at all three, but you're going to have to be a special guy to be good at three different variables, four different variables, how you're going to describe it. What I would tell you is you have to be honest with yourself about what you're struggling at and what you need to train the most. So if you had come in and you're running a 12, but you're doing 25 push-ups, so that there's things as far as your strength endurance you need to focus your training on. You can sacrifice 10 seconds or 20 seconds on your 2-miler to up your push-ups 20 to 25. Maybe that's a slight gain in muscle mass, and that could be a diet thing that you're working on. It could be a cross-training thing, so you're doing a lot of metabolic conditioning and you're not doing a lot of like traditional strength training where you're doing 2s and 3s of reps. I know that's what everybody wants to do because the more weight you put on the board, more people you can impress. That's what's happening in the gym. But you may not be the person who likes to run though, and that'd be the complete opposite of that. So if you're barely making the 14 times that you need to, but you're doing 120 push-ups, or you're the guy that can squat 400, deadlift 5, and press 350 or 4, that's great. But it's a continuum. Yeah. So if you want to be the guy that's good at everything, great. I do too, but I'm not. So like I would say you rank them. I would rank them depending on how bad I was at one, and then I would take that variable.
You got to balance them out, right? And then it goes down to you don't have to love that thing. You have to care about it, but then it comes down to the rules of the game are what they are. If the rules of the game are you must do X, Y, and Z, the game and the rules of the game, it doesn't give a shit about your opinions. They are what they are. So you need to accept that and dominate those versus doing what you prefer, I guess. But anyway,
I think a big part of that though too, Aaron, is I think you hit on the head. Is like you have to be self-aware of that. One, you talk to the people who are helping you program to prepare, and if you're the guys who are keeping it accountable to either prepare with you, or if you're on your own, you're self-aware of those areas for improvement where you have to give a little bit, and that's it's staying focused on the task at hand so you can go to selection as best prepared as possible, holistically, mind body combination.
So I'll turn it over to Jake in 1 second. I'm just from the actual pinpoint of it. Like if I give you a 4-day program, and I'm a little bit more of maybe a conjugate guy on some things just because I really like the system, but it doesn't matter to me what training philosophy you take. What I would tell you is that even within like something, I know Louis going to roll over in his grave when I say something about doing metabolic conditioning with a conjugate system, but I'm not giving you a one-size-fits-all system. Like you're going to do metabolic conditioning while I'm trying to get you stronger. I'm not giving up strength. And that's the one thing that a lot of people lose. They'll give up one complete variable because they're so worried about the other one. You don't give up one variable. You can train multiple things at a time. You won't be able to train as well as if you're only training one thing at a time. But I'll have a guy do an upper body day, and then I'll have him do a metabolic conditioning day of 15 minutes or 20 minutes at the end of every single day that we do. I'll have him do a circuit day in the middle of the week where it's body weight. And then I'll have them do something like on Saturday where it's either a long run or a session where you're doing unconventional lifting and carrying and loading and stuff like that, where you're not in the weight room. And that's where I would take some of like the pinpoint stuff, is just being able to program things where you're going to get more than one thing during that week. And whatever the most important thing, that's the most volume that you do. So you may get 60% aerobic conditioning, 20% muscular endurance, 20% of backside training, posterior chain training, whatever it may break up to be. But it's just to be a little bit more exact about what we're talking about, to give that some people idea what I would kind of do.
But for the listeners, for Louis, you're talking about Louis Simmons.
Yeah, right? Louis Simmons, yes, sorry.
The West Side Barbell, they train the strongest individuals. But even Louis, he was like, hey, the guy comes in here, doesn't have the proper work capacity. They make him do sled pushes all day long until they at least have that so it doesn't hurt people.
Absolutely.
Right? So, all right. Jake, what you got?
Shit, Aaron, you're singing my song right now, man. I love it. It's yeah, I mean, the bottom line is like, if you ask anyone what they want to do in the gym that day, it's going to be something they're fucking good at. Like, the guy who can deadlift, 550, 600 pounds, he has like a 1,200 pound total. He's not going to be like, let's go run. He's not going to say that, like, because you know what? Because now you take the most aggro alpha guy, because the bottom line is most men place an emphasis on strength, as well as how big and intimidating guys are. That's just a guy thing. Like we look at guys who are all fucking jacked and you're like, dude, I want to be like that guy. He's scary looking. Even if he doesn't know how to fight, he just looks like he knows how to fight, right? And so a lot of guys are naturally they're gonna naturally resort towards strength and building an intimidating look, right? And no one's going to be like, oh, bro, check out my aerobic capacity on Instagram, right? Look at me, 140 beats a minute for fucking 90 minutes. They're not going to do that, and it's not sexy. It's not fun, you know.
It doesn't make you look like an inverted Dorito or an upside down Dorito.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like you have to like separate out, like, do I look like an SF guy or am I an SF guy, right? And like, to me, the SF guy is the guy who can put a ruck on and just like charge through the mountains and can shoot, and he's tactically proficient, and he's got, you know, language skills. He can jump or dive. He can do all these things. It doesn't matter how big his chest and shoulders are, if he has a six pack, because the bottom line is I've seen plenty of those guys go out in the woods, whether it's recreational backpacking or hunting trips, and just like turn into like the most pathetic man you've ever like been around, you know. And they have the tattoos, they have the muscles, and
tattoos
you're like,
are scary.
dude, like, you're a big scary guy, you know. But like, man, you just throw a little bit of elevation and some vertical like climbing in the mix, and a pack, and it's just like it all just goes away. So having that professionalism of like, this is what's required of me, not versus this is what's cool or what's popular. And the bottom line is, most girls don't even like big jack guys, right? It gets to a point where, am I just lifting weights to look cool in front of other dudes, which is kind of silly, you know? Like, most of us think like girls don't look at He-Man and be like, I want a boyfriend that looks like He-Man. But like all the dudes look at He-Man and go, I want to look like He-Man.
She did.
So I think there's that big idea of, you know, doing what you do. Skeletor's Jack too.
I was always a Skeletor.
He's a Jack Skeleton. Yeah. That's kind of weird. Everybody He-Man was Jack. Come on.
Yeah, it's like Skeletor and Starscream. Those two characters, I'm like, they're the same voice. They're almost like the same character. You know, they're always, you know. And Aaron was talking about like understanding what it's called floors and ceilings, right? So like, there's a minimum performance level that is needed. There's also a maximum that once you like get to that maximum, your return on training investment is really low. So like Aaron mentioned, like, hey, you're pulling 500 pounds, right? It's like, okay, you're a 500-pound deadlifter. Like, nothing in the SF world really requires you to pick up 500 pounds. Even a really big guy who's fully kitted out doesn't weigh 500 pounds, right?
Jake,
so understanding like,
Jake, can you talk a little bit about how much work it would take to get you from like 500 pounds to 510 relative to how much work it would take you to get to like 200 pounds to 250? Like relative to what, exactly what you're talking about, but like the return on investment.
Yeah, I mean, the return on investment, right, is like there's also something I learned in business school. It's called law of diminishing returns, where once you get to a certain point, like let's just say deadlifting, okay? So a new athlete, you want to get him from 2 to 250 on a deadlift. He can deadlift 3 times a week, probably twice a week. Twice a week deadlift for 4 to 6 weeks, and he's going to make really big gains on the front side. But if you're like already close to what we call the ceiling, and you're like, okay, hey, I can deadlift 500, I want to go for 510. That's going to take complex individual training in a very long time just to get that 10 pounds. When these newer athletes, or who are much closer to the floor, they can do that probably 10 pounds every 2 weeks for, 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks. That's why you see like high school kids get so strong. It's because they're at the floor right now. But when you have like a seasoned professional, especially like Aaron's working collegiate athletes, like Aaron's job is really not to make the collegiate athletes that much stronger. He's got to keep them healthy, right? And make them, because at that point, when you're like collegiate and professional, you have racehorses, right? Like you're not taking this unmolded, validated person and making them into a superhero. Like, you already have. If you're a college football player, like you are already like a high level athlete. And so now it's like, hey, how can I make them a little bit stronger and keep them healthy so they can probably go pro or have like really high performance on the field? So we always tell people like, hey, you need to spend more time on what your floors are. So you can break up the different training attributes and be like, hey, this guy's a high level. He's like a 9 out of 10 on strength, but he's like a 2 out of 10 on his run time. It's like, hey man, I'm sorry, but 3 days a week, we're going to focus on this. And then 1 day a week, you're just going to maintain your strength. And then on the other day, we're going to work on this other aspect. Because, guys like Aaron's a big, strong guy, I assume. Strength is not going to hold Aaron back in selection.
He's huge. He's like literally ducking here in the Falcon Snail Pub.
I mean, like
He's a
Aaron,
bouncer.
like you could probably never touch a barbell again. He could still probably hammer fist me into just I give up, right? Because he's like big and strong. But maybe Aaron needs like aerobic capacity. So maybe his run time suffers, right? And so, and on the other side of the equation, you have athletes who are like 150 pounds and they need to get stronger. They need to put on mass because you know what? They need to be able to carry guys like Aaron if he goes down. So it's that floor ceiling idea of like, hey, spend your time, or if you put it in the terms of money, like invest your money where you're going to get the highest return. Invest your training time where you're going to get the highest return.
Yeah, that time though, right? Because we're talking about investments, but time is that one investment in life that you don't get it back. So you need to really make sure that the return on investment on that is legit, right? So if you have the requirement to run a 2 mile time in a certain amount of time, you can deadlift 500 pounds, but you're going to choose to invest that into trying to get that 510 or 520 deadlift, but you're going to fail your PT test. Like, are you really investing that time appropriately? Because you're not going to get that back, right? And I think that's what you're talking about, is that ceiling is where are you getting that return on investment? Because time is finite, so invest it appropriately so you can get what you want, right?
Yeah. And there's also a little jeopardy for injury in there as well. Like if you're chasing certain heavy barbell lifts and you're not a very technical lifter, and like bottom line is there's only one Aaron, and how many guys is kind of in his realm, right? So he can't be there and watch every guy's session. And if they don't have good technique and they do something themselves, now they're out of the game, or they could even come very close to hurting themselves and then hurt themselves downrange, and now they're a liability, to the team. So you have to be really smart with some of these things. I mean, it's one thing if the guy is not in the military and he wants to be a competitive powerlifter. It's like, hey man, like go all out, dude. Like do your thing. Do all the good medicines. Like do the heavy volume models. Like train at high intensity. Do what you gotta do to be successful there. But bottom line is, how many SF guys are going to go to actually get on a platform and do like a powerlifting meet? I'd say 1 out of probably 500 may have actually done it once in their life, much less how many guys are doing it regularly. It's just totally unnecessary.
Yeah, let's define some things real quick. So we talked about aerobic capacity. I know, at least from your side of the house, Jake, you guys talk about, hey, the bigger your aerobic base, the higher anaerobic ceiling can be. But let's define aerobic capacity between the two of you. Like, what does that even mean?
So I think if you look at it from a purely simple standpoint, is that it's your VO2 max. So how far can you run, how fast, with controlling your heart rate being under control. So if you're looking at something and you can do it in time, it's the easiest way to do it. So my time for this amount of mileage is this. You can look at it from heart rate training. So you can train where your heart rate is this level or this percentage for this amount of time, and that's going to tell you how fit I am. You can actually get on a body jewel, and I'm not sure what they use to test VO2 max right now. I'm sure there's something better they've invented now to test VO2 max, but it's the amount of oxygen you inhale and exhale. So it's inspiration and expiration. We used to do it when I was in grad school with actual bags that the old school bags you would actually push the air out of when you were done. But you can do whatever test you want to. It's just the amount of volume of work that you can do in a specific amount of time. And you can max out anything with that. But I would the actual aerobic base is just, to me, is how much you can repeat an effort. Strength to me would be how much intensity you can repeat at one time. So like, hey, I could do this amount of weight one time. That's pure strength. Pure aerobic capacity is how much I can do this repeated effort. And that could be, not just running. It could be, metabolic conditioning circuit. I can do this weight this many times in this amount of time period.
Yeah, Aaron, I think you had mentioned earlier, everything is a spectrum, and like that's what we teach as well on the metabolic side and the muscular side. And the aerobic capacity is kind of like the foundation. So we like to kind of like use this as gas tanks, right? So Aaron knows, and anyone who's doing strength and conditioning, that there's essentially 3 types of energy systems, and the aerobic system is the biggest, largest, and most robust. So just by teaching your body how to pull energy from that, it's always pulling from all 3, depending on what you're doing. Like if Chuck is like running up ahead and he sees something like a bad guy, he sprints towards that bad guy, and then he like throws like a flying elbow at him, right? Like he's used his aerobic, his glycolytic, and his creatine phosphate system all in one endeavor. So you're always pulling from all 3 of them. But the idea of just building a base, which comes is everything in an endurance world has to do with base, like how many hours you log, how many miles, whatever it may be. Essentially what you're doing is that you're just trying to teach your body to pull from a less exhaustible source of energy, right? Sugars, I mean, we've all seen guys probably who have bombed, right? They They run high on the glycolytic energy system, and about an hour 15 in, output just drops, right? Because they're so dependent on the sugars and carbs in their body, the glycogen, that they haven't taught their body how to use what is nearly an inexhaustible source of energy. Like, once again, it is boring. It is awful. It requires assessments on the front side, whether you're doing like blood lactate, VO2 maxes, fat to carb, like, your gas exchange. It's a whole bunch of like nerdy, boring stuff. But the challenge is that there's so much information on the strength side and there's so much information on the endurance side. The hard part is, how do we bring the two together? Because the issue is, SF guys or any, like tier 1 unit or high level infantry unit, like, they have to have both. They have to be able to move over ground. They have to be strong and like have a high level maximal strength. They have to be able to repeatedly do work and then have a short break and then do it again. And so if you just want to get strong, it's easy. You can read 5-3-1. You can do, conjugate method. You could do this, 5x5s, whatever. And then if you want to have a really good like endurance performance, same thing. There's tons of books out there. Joel Friel, the Daniels running method. There's, like dozens and dozens of guys. But the question is, like, now when you blend these two together, how do you blend them together where they don't negatively influence each other? And then that's where Aaron was talking about, like, hey, I talk to the individual. Like, hey, what can you do? What are your strong points? What are your weak points? Let me assess you and see where you need to allocate your training time. So it's a challenging thing to like balance all these variables. And to just go back to the original question, Chuck, is, aerobic capacity is developing that, aerobic energy system, which allows you just to continue to work for extended duration. But that's only part one. Part two is you have to like start doing intervals. You have to start doing tempo training, threshold training, to actually kind of train that glycolytic system, because one kind of sits upon the other. It's not, you can't just do one or the other. You can't just do CrossFit and a bunch of long, slow distance. You kind of have to do one, then the other, if that makes sense.
Hey, so I wanted to ask you guys, how do you advise individuals that are either prepping to go to selection or even thinking about that while they're at selection itself, fueling themselves? I'm talking, food, nutrition, intake for max performance, in preparation to get to selection, so during that preparation phase, and then while they're at selection, which, Special Forces Assessment selection is 21 days. How do you advise people on what they should be doing to fuel themselves while there?
I worked with a lot of dietitians over the years, just from pulling from their recommendations. I would tell you that there's very simple things that I would promote, and I'm not a dietitian, so like I would highly recommend you go seek out somebody with a degree that has background in it. I would tell you that one of the things that have stuck with me a lot was whole foods. Like, you're not eating processed foods, you're eating whole, veggies, meats, even nuts, stuff of that nature. You're cutting any processed sugar out of your diet, that kind of stuff. Just fueling yourself with the common sense things. Don't be one of those guys that has a very specific diet. Like, you're not prescribing, and I've heard this a lot, is like, keto is not recommended for tactical athletes, especially field performance. Like, it's not something that's going to be great for you in that realm. You need carbohydrates to fuel yourself, and that's what Jake was talking about as far as energy system development stuff. Like, is you fuel yourself in certain ways with carbohydrates, you fuel yourself in certain ways with protein. You can use all energy systems, but there's a dominant one depending on what you're doing. And if it's a long duration activity, anything over like a minute or so, up to 2 minutes, you're looking at where carbohydrates are going to be very important to you, but good carbohydrates, not processed sugars, obviously, that kind of stuff, common sense things. The big one for me, and I'll let Jake talk about this because he's going to have a lot more experience than I had with it as far as personally, but being able to utilize an MRE in a correct way.
Oh, yeah. MRE, the meal ready to eat.
But being able to break it down, know what's in it, know why the stuff is in there. Trading, if you're going to trade like value things in MREs. Don't be the guy, and I've heard this story more than one time, that dumps his water before a ruck because it's weighing him down.
Hell no.
Dumps all the water out. I've asked many guys.
That guy does exist. Yeah. That guy or girl does exist.
Dumps the water before they ruck because it's extra weight that they're carrying. Don't be the person that throws out all the stuff they don't like out of their MRE because they don't like it. It's in there for a specific reason. Don't trade a meat for a Skittles pack. Stuff like that. It just doesn't work out. So the fueling, I try and keep it as common sense as I can because I've worked with some very smart people over the years. I don't want to step on their toes as far as like the ones that have master's degrees and board certified dietitians that should be, you should comment on this kind of stuff. But I just try not to, anything that I can do to master the simple things makes the complicated things a lot easier. So if I can master all the simple things like eating good foods, the complicated things about the actual fueling macronutrients, I need this macronutrient there, whether it's carbohydrates, fats, protein, it makes that stuff a lot easier if I have availability of good food.
No, really well said, Chuck. I hope someday you and I can do a podcast solely focused on the culinary expertise of the MRE. I have a strong desire to go like to an ROTC class and just rip open a bunch of MREs and be like, this is how you make key lime pie, or this is how you make nachos. Or
you're getting 4 officer points for that nonsense.
All right, Jake, over to you, man. Talk to us a little bit about your expertise and advice on fueling prior to and then at that selection setting, please.
Okay, well, I guess obviously people have degrees in this, and they're called dietitians, as Aaron mentioned. So those are definitely the best people to talk to. But I think common sense, we all know what we're supposed to eat. Like, you don't look in the pantry and see a Rice Krispie and be like, oh, I should eat this, right? You want to eat it, but you know you shouldn't eat it, right? So whole natural foods, a good balance of fats, carbohydrates, and proteins. The problem is that it's kind of like you don't want to change your shoes before race day, right? Like you don't like train for a marathon and then go buy new shoes and don't run in them and do it. So the downside of like preparing is that obviously you want to eat as many good whole foods as you can and have a good macronutrient balance. But depending on what selection you're going to, you don't know how often you're going to eat and you don't know what you're going to eat, right? So if you get your like GI system all dialed into like a very particular kind of macronutrient balance of a certain number of calories, and then you feel this way and that's how you feel all the time. Let's just say you're in a surplus and you're at like 3,500 calories a day. And then all of a sudden you drop down to 2,000 calories a day. Maybe it's Ranger School, or, I mean, I'm not sure. I've never gone to SFAS, so I don't know if they limit your calories. But I know like in RASP and other places they do. Then you're going to be like, it's an external variable that you may not be prepared for. If you're doing like, I'm doing gluten-free, or I'm doing this, or I'm doing that. And then all of a sudden you start throwing these unknown variables in. That's going to negatively impact your performance. It's going to negatively impact your, psyche. So I think you have to have a little bit of adaptability there. Like you're probably going to like need to intentionally kind of eat, shitty foods on occasion. So that way you can make sure that you're not going to have any GI upset. You're not going to be having the runs in the selection when you need to be focused on your mental energy on something else because you've been eating so clean, like, I'm eating, elk meat and broccoli and, complex carbs like quinoa, fish and rice. And then all of a sudden, we're throwing like a, meatloaf MRE at you and you're like, oh my God, I'm shitting 2 or 3 times a night now because this food is so jacked up. So I think you have to balance those things out. Now, on the other side of the equation, not being selection, if you're operational, that's when you really need to learn like, hey, okay, I know what it's like to do a 12-hour mission. And I know like, hey, I need electrolytes. And I know I'm going to need carbs every, 60, 90 minutes from working hard. Maybe that's Gatorade packs and pour them in your water bottle. Maybe it's something like LMNT, which is like sodium pack and electrolytes. Hey, I know I'm going to need this at some point. You just need a hard mission. I need that protein to recover. So there's a lot on the nutrition side. It's really environmentally dependent and also individually dependent. But like if you're sensitive to certain things and you're in selection, they hand you an MRE. It's like, hey man, like unless someone wants to trade with you, it's like that's what you got. So you got to choose like calories or no calories, and then potentially, hey, what's going to happen when it's all said and done? So I think a lot of the endurance nutrition stuff could probably tie into selection, and you can hop on any ultra marathon type platforms, any triathlete type platforms, and start to ID like, hey, this is ideal fueling while working, but you might not always have that luxury in a selection process.
No, great input, Jake. Appreciate it, man.
So what you're saying is 8 months before selection, just start eat MREs. Breakfast, lunch.
Yeah, those things are awful, man. I'm pretty much a peak refuel guy now. I just do those freeze dried in the backcountry, and those are like, those are amazing.
The winter MREs, the freeze dried ones, they're pretty amazing. And that's the one everybody wants anyway.
The old school Lurst ones are pretty good. I remember those. You pour the boiling water, and it's kind of like a mountain house.
It's exactly like a mountain house, right?
10 minutes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're pretty good. All right, so we talked about APFT, all that stuff. The ACFT, it's a thing.
This is the new Army Combat Fitness Test. A little controversy over the past, I think, 2 years, but it's official. It is implemented.
Both your quick opinions on it, but then how do we train for this thing for success, right? Because it has a lot of things in there that people don't necessarily want to train for. But in my opinion, it hits the three things we talked about, which we didn't hit all of them, but work capacity, strength, endurance, and aerobic capacity, strength, endurance, and work capacity. I think it hits all three of those. I was against it. Now I'm kind of for it, and I don't know. But Aaron will hit you, and then we'll hit Jake. First of all, what's your opinion on it? We'll get both of your opinions on it, and then we'll hit, like, how do we train for this thing?
I think I've seen it for a while. I think it tests what you want it to test. If you drill down into it, the people who created it, I don't know how much they had the idea of what the actual requirements of missions would be for people taking it. But I think it tests an aerobic capacity. It tests the strength capacity with the deadlift. It does some strength endurance with the push-ups. With now would be the plank. I know it used to be the knee tucks. But what I think they didn't look at as far as what the test was is the skill that it took to do a couple of the movements, which was the sprint, drag, carry, and then the power toss. The more you talk to people, the more the people that are capable of doing those things well struggle with some of the, especially with the power toss, with the technical aspect. The launch angle on a ball thrown behind you is something that most people don't think about. But if you're doing it for distance, you absolutely have to know the launch angle of a ball and how to extend your hips and be powerful with this thing. It's a multiple level event, so you're working more than one thing, more than one plane of movement at a time. So it's if you haven't practiced it, if you've been push-ups, sit-ups, 2-mile run your entire career, being able to do a correct slide, especially when you've been taxed by a drag or been taxed by a carry. I've seen more people faceplant off doing that slide than I've seen anybody faceplant in my entire career working with athletes. It's your jelly legs. You're not used to doing that kind of multiple levels of movement, and that's one of the things that we can get into when you talk about training for the event. But theoretically, it tests what you want it to test. It's just I don't think people were prepared for the actual technical aspects of when they implemented it, rather than a very, very simple push-up, sit-up, 2-mile run.
Jake?
Yeah. I mean, it's a step in the right direction. It's definitely better than the APFT. And like I said, we've done it. We've had guys come to the gym and do it. We've trained all our athletes through it. It's like the challenging thing is not everyone has the resources that SWCS has. And they don't have guys that are professional, former collegiate level coaches coaching them how to do this stuff correctly. So you have to think of, how can I run a whole bunch of people who don't know what they're doing very quickly through a multi-phase assessment? And that's hard. That's a hard challenge to kind of meet. When you're talking, I don't know who has the trap bar deadlift contract with the U.S. Army, but they just made a ton of money. But the thing is,
Beaver Fit,
Sornex,
Sornex.
But the thing is, if you had everyone in the Army doing traditional barbell deadlifts without proper education, you'd have a whole bunch of jacked up backs, And so even though the regular deadlift is the better exercise, I think, depending on how you deadlift, it can be a totally different, pull. The bottom line is, I think a trap bar is a little safer. You hear Mark Rippetoe, he goes off on a tangent. He's like, F that, worst thing ever. But I've run a lot of novice athletes through how to deadlift and different programs. The bottom line is, if they don't do it right, they're going to hurt themselves, because you can definitely, especially the older you get, the more miles on your body, you can definitely get pumped up, have your guys around kind of cheering you on and pull more weight than you should. So, but I think it is a step in the right direction. I can max all the events except, surprisingly, the power toss, because I'm a small guy, I got short limbs, and I just can't toss that ball. I've yet to throw a max score on that one event. And then I have tall, thin athletes at my gym who first toss, they max it. I'm just like, what? I'm so much stronger than that guy. How did he do that? But I think it's a good test. I think it's a step in the right direction. I think as long as they're continually applying or trying to make an effort to find a good metric to measure fitness, I think they're moving in the right direction. But I think me and Aaron can sit down and design a better one.
Yes.
something like the old Harbinger.
Yeah.
So talking about the Army Combat Physical Fitness Test, we talked about our opinions on it. Let's talk about training for it. What are some good techniques? And Jake, I'm going to hit you off at first, because with programming, really want to quickly hit on the 4Ps, and then how do you apply that to the ACFT?
Okay, so ACFT, I think the first thing in preparation is to get an initial benchmark.
Well, explain the 4Ps real quick before you even hit on that.
Okay, so 4Ps, purpose. You know, when you sit down and write a program, what are you trying to accomplish? And
The why.
it may seem kind of a lot. What's that?
The why, right?
It's the why, and that's all it is. And it's like, okay, like, what are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish? You know, what is our purpose in sitting down and writing a, 4, 6, 8 week mesocycle? You know, like, what are you trying to accomplish? And it can't just be like to get more fit. I mean, you can just exercise and get more fit, but like, what are you trying to tackle? Progression. Most people have no clue what progression is. Obviously, Aaron does, but the idea of applying progressive overload, I mean, it's extremely important. Like, you have to understand that your body's going to adapt, and whenever you do something, you can do it multiple times without having to progress. But the bottom line is that you will need to progress volume or intensity or frequency at some point to see continued improvement.
It needs to be feasibly progressive, not just have some
gradually. Yeah, a lot of guys, this is like a very common thing in the endurance world is like, I'm going to run a marathon. And so they go out and they do like their cumulative weekly volume would be like 6 miles normally. And then they go out and do 15 miles. And then they do 20 miles. And then they do like 24 miles. And it's like, no, you have to like gradually progress. Like, if you're an experienced strength athlete, I mean, you're progressing like 2.5% probably, from like session to session. You don't jump 10% in your training intensity. You go from like one to the other. So progression, I mean, that is the probably most powerful concept, I think, of training, whether it's endurance or strength, is, how do you progress volume or intensity over time? The other one is periodization. I know in our little text thread earlier, we were talking about this idea of, blocking off your training and creating more of a macro plan. That's the big thing about training. And, people are like, what am I doing today? And today really doesn't matter. Like, what matters is, how does today fit into this month, this mesocycle, this macro cycle? That's what really matters. And so people are so consumed with like, what is happening today? How am I going to feel when I get done? If I throw up, it was a great session. Like, no, it was probably too hard if you threw up, Training's different than assessments. Like, if you do an assessment and you throw up, that's okay. That means you went hard. If you're training and throwing up, you probably went too hard. And some guys go too hard all the time. And some people don't ever go hard enough. So you have to kind of like swing that scale. So what is that? We got progression, we got purpose, progression, periodization, and then programming. You have to write a plan. You can't just have these like loose ideas and just walk in the gym and come up with it. Like, you need to like have a detailed plan of like, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do first to warm up and prepare. These are my primary training circuits. This is my volume. This is my intensity. And like, all those things need to be mapped out ideally in advance. Otherwise, you're just kind of leaning out. Now, obviously, how you feel that day and who the individual is going to influence all those factors, what they're trying to accomplish. Technically doing best ranger would be different than going to a selection, just because the duration of the event and how compacted everything is. SFAS is going to be a little bit different than going to Delta selection, just because some of the overland movements are so much longer, So those 4Ps, I mean, really what it comes down to, the 4Ps are just kind of common sense when you sit down and write a plan in a program. Like, hey, what am I trying to do? How am I going to make it harder? How am I going to fit this piece of the puzzle with other pieces of the puzzle and moving over the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months? Because I mean, most guys getting ready for selection, they're not going to just show up, like decide a month before and be like, I'm going to go to SFAS. They're going to have 6 or 7 months beforehand. So they're going to need like, come up, come down, recover, go up, come down, recover. And I think, and Aaron has a background in collegiate sports. So the things that you manipulate are volume and intensity. Doesn't matter if you're doing endurance, doesn't matter if you're doing speed, doesn't matter if you're doing strength, but like volume and intensity are the two variables that if you can artfully manipulate those two, you're going to get progress.
And they're inversely related, correct?
Say again?
They're inversely related.
They are, right? So like, Aaron's not going to write a program for someone and it's going to go, okay, you're going to do a, let's just say a 6x8 at 90%. Like that, you just don't do that, right? You have to understand that the higher the volume, the lower intensity. He also wouldn't have someone going out and being like, hey, you're going to go out and run 12, 62-second 400s. Like you just have to understand that like the harder something is, the less frequently you can do it and the less repetitions you can do it. But if it's long, slow, easy, or if it's like hypertrophy training, you can do a lot more volume at that. So those two things they have an inverse relationship. And so a lot of guys have this misconception that the harder it is and the more it is, the better it is. And that's not always the case.
And really, if you got to break it down simplistically to its lowest common denominator, your body only really cares about volume and intensity and how you apply that to progression, correct?
I would say more your body doesn't care about the exercise as much as the volume and intensity you apply.
Yep.
Right. So it's like front squat, back squat, split squat, single leg squat. Like your body doesn't know what fucking exercise it's doing or what's on its back. It doesn't know if it's a sandbag. It doesn't know if it's a barbell. It doesn't know if I have chuck on my back. What it understands is how many reps am I doing and how hard is it? So it recognizes volume and intensity. There's no best exercise. The best exercise is the ones like, for example, in a powerlifting meet or you're getting ready to do a strongman or something like that. The best exercises are the ones that allow you to use the highest intensity, right? Or for example, if you're doing the endurance side of things, it's like running is a good modality for endurance because you're able to do it again and again and again. If you want to do a powerlifting meet, the back squat is one of the exercises you can structurally load the most weight on your body possible. So, like Aaron, what's a good back squat?
For a guy in the population that we're talking about, if you're thinking about 400, maybe.
Now, how many SF guys can pick up a 400-pound fucking sandbag?
Oh, none.
Exactly. So then,
I'm sorry, I don't mean none, but odds are low.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like, it's not so much like the back squat is a badass exercise because of the tool that it is and the way you can load it. The mechanics are the same as a sandbag back squat or picking up a buddy, whatever it is. So it's that idea that like, what's the best exercise? That's kind of a bullshit question. It's like, for what is the response I would have?
So when you were talking about that, Jake, so the 4 Ps, I learned it a different way. It's the same concept, but I would tell you like a yearly plan. And you can say 7 months, whatever it is. So you look at it at a 10,000 foot perspective. How I would do it is I would take an Excel spreadsheet and I would list all of the variables, the strength variables, strength endurance, straight, single set strength, multiple set strength, whatever you want to call them. You call them the NSA manual, a lot of different things. My cardiovascular variables, so my aerobic conditioning, glycolytic, aerobic, however you want to break it up. You have it all listed there, and then you take your months and you write the calendar at the top and you shade what you're going to do at each month of the cycles, the mesocycles you're working on. Then you start narrowing your focus until you're doing by the weeks or by the month, and then until you get to the microcycles. What Jake's saying right there, and I can't impress upon people enough, is the last thing you do is program exercises. Like, I'm not thinking about doing back squats the first thing that I'm trying to write a program for. I'm thinking about how I'm going to actually narrow down the specific thing that I have to get better at in this period of time. And you can do it to a lot of different periodization plans. You can do undulating linear, you can do linear, block, conjugate, however you want to do it. It's just, you have to be able to look at a 10,000 foot view and then start writing the actual goals down, broad strokes, and then specific. The last thing that you need to do is ever write an exercise down. Whether you're front squatting or back squatting or deadlifting or never touching a barbell, if that's your thing, if you're doing just kettlebell training, like it's the variables that you're training. It's not the exercise that you're using. The exercise is the last thing. It's the hammer to drive the nail. It's not the entire house. Like, that's not the plans for the house. So it's one of those things where the yearly plan, the 4 Ps, how you actually program it, rather than just thinking about, I go in there and it's until I vomit, which is, you hear that, you would think that would not be something that happens now, but more often than not, I hear just went as hard as I possibly could today. Did you have any plan? No. I'm just going to go deadlift 100 times, and I'm going to go run 3 miles. And after that, I'm going to go out and I'm going to hit the kettlebell for about, 45 minutes. Like, why?
Yep.
Because it's hard.
To feel the pain.
Yeah. Okay.
To embrace the suck.
Yeah, literally. I think it was one of the events that Chuck brought us down for, and we were at. I think it might have been the Jefferson, and one of the guys was a captain. He was an alpha, and he was saying like, he's like, oh yeah, I don't. He goes, if I don't throw up, I don't consider it a good workout. I go, oh really? Like, tell me why. He's like, well, like if you throw up, that means you really applied the right amount of effort. And I go, oh, okay. So like this guy is like sitting down, going to work out, and basically trying to make himself vomit like every session. And it's like, I admire like the grit and determination, but the bottom line is, Chuck, you're killing me. The bottom line is, like no matter how motivated you are, like you still have to recognize. I think the analogy I use is a car and a driver, right? So your brain and how you approach training is like the driver, and then the car is your body. And the bottom line is that your body can only handle so much. Some can handle more than others, but the bottom line is like you can be excessively motivated and be in like overreaching or overtraining pretty much perpetually. And the other side of the equation, you have someone who is not very motivated to train, and they're training well below the necessary frequency, volume, and intensity that they should be. So going back to what Aaron mentioned earlier, like who is this person? Like what is their desire to train? What do I have to watch out for? So like some athletes, we have to be like, hey man, you need to back it down. Like you need to like drop some weight because your form is breaking down and your reps look shitty. Like those are not quality reps. And then other athletes are like, hey man, you look great. Like you need to put some weight in the fucking bar, And so that idea of individualized programming and individualized coaching really comes into play, because like this guy that I talked to, like he went like so hard every day that he was probably never even properly recovering to like see the value of the training, like the value comes after you train. The values, I guess there's a little bit of value mentally while you're doing something hard, but you need that 12 to 24 to 48 hour window to like get in that fatigue state and then start to recover and then build fitness. And if you're like improperly timing those aspects and how often you're training that attribute, you're really missing out. You're not getting the most out of your training.
Some of it too for me is that if you're working at an elite level and going to most selections are going to be trying to work at an elite level, you're now working within the margins. And guys try to apply the same concepts and logic they did when they were not working in the margins, where they were just new and they were training in high school and they were making these gains based off of programs and different styles of training that they were doing then. And they try and apply them now with their a much higher level. So when you're doing that kind of concept, what you're going to end up is what Jake's talking about. You're going to overtrain because it's going to be more. It's not about what, it's about how much for those guys.
Yeah.
And that's like I've seen, and I can tell you there's guys I've written programs for that their max mileage per week is 15 to 20 miles. And that's all they're going to run per week. And they're running a 13-minute 2-miler. There's also guys that can handle volume. I mean, I ran D1 cross country. We had volume of 100, 110 miles a week. There's going to be guys that thrive in volume, and they're going to be able to do that. Now, I would never give somebody that much volume. We were just running. That was all we ever did. So it's a wholly different adventure. But there's guys that can handle more volume. Maybe they're 30 miles a week, but it's just very, very poignant on the guy. And if all you really ever care about is how much and not what, then you're going to lose a lot because you're still stuck in something that you've done 10, 15, maybe 20 years ago, depending on where you are in your career.
One thing I want to kind of tie together what you guys are saying here, and I absolutely love, and I think both Aaron and Jake, you guys are articulating it really well, is there's a plan. There's a plan in place. And just like we apply our planning and expertise in planning, all that training that goes in within special operations is that you are coming up with a plan and a pathway to get to a desired goal or end state. You're really mapping that out. You're going to do some contingency planning because some days you're not going to feel it. Some days you're going to have distractions. Life is going to get in the way. But you're always trying to work through and then surround yourself with people who keep you motivated, accountable, and then just like you guys, for example, as coaches and expertise and advisors, you can always have that kind of reach back to continue to adjust that plan as necessary. Because I imagine, just like we always kind of say in the military, your plan always survives first contact. So that plan you're going to have at day one continuously has to be relooked and refined based off of those incremental progressions you're going to make. And once you do hit, say any walls or any struggles or even possibly injuries, you have to kind of reset and figure out where you continue to progress from there based off of your goal that you have set in stone, for that end state.
Well, let me tie both these gentlemen in with a quick example, right? So last year I had a lower back fusion, right? And right as I finished the surgery, I reached out to Jake. I'm like, Jake, I'm high on pain meds, but I need to get back in shape. Let's talk about how I'm going to get back in beast mode, right? So Jake sat down with me.
Beast mode.
We built this badass long-range plan, which really started with nothing and worked its way up through tire drags and a bunch of low-impact stuff. And Aaron really helped design my like almost strength. I wouldn't call it strength at the time, but the stuff I was doing in the gym at work, we would run it by the physical therapist, and she would say, okay, you can't quite do this yet on what Jake's given me. And we'd come up with this consensus, and then that built the plan that we try to keep 7 to 8 weeks at a time. And I just executed that. And before I even started running again, my VO2 max was insane for where I thought I was. It was like between like 52 and 54. So when I started running, I had incredible times, and I was able to really get back to where I can do everything I was doing before again with zero pain. And it was because I took smart people, and we just followed the 4 Ps. We had a purpose. We knew I was training for, which was to get back to where I could do things, but really training towards the ACFT. And we knew that, it was going to be a year to get there. We could periodize it out. We had a program, right? And it was successful because now for the first time, and since I can remember, I have zero pain and I can perform. And it's really thanks to you guys. And it was due to implementing everything we just talked about and not training on what I preferred. Because I used to be able to deadlift, 500 to 600 pounds, and I was good at that kind of stuff. And do all this stuff, which, I'll never be able to that level. Like right now, I'm deadlifting like 315. I mean, for sets of 3, which is a hit on me, but it's what it is.
There's a certain amount of humility, I think, with healthy guys, with injured guys, especially with guys who suffer combat injuries, to be honest with you, is because it's really hard to reconcile. And it's from, I have 3 slip discs in my back, just any normal injury, really, not even something severe. You were capable of doing something 5 minutes ago that you're not capable of doing now because of an acute injury. It's really hard to reconcile that mentally to me. Like, I know I can do it, but I'm hurt. I can't do it. And it's a reestablishing of what you value. And I talk to guys a lot about that is maybe you valued more than anything deadlifting. And it wasn't your run. You passed everything. You were fine, but you valued your 500, 600 deadlift more than anything else as far as your fitness goes. You hurt your back. You can't deadlift. Like, I mean, you could. It's not going to be nearly as good. You can't push yourself to the place you were. So now you reevaluate, and even if it's a partial movement, so you can't deadlift from the floor, so you deadlift on blocks. You partial presses, so you can't go all the way to your chest because you have shoulder impingement issues. It's not something that can be corrected. It's a structural damage injury. So instead of normal bench pressing, your neutral grip bar, Swiss bar pressing to blocks, you're using that as your strength measure of what you would define your strength measure as. It's really hard to kind of accept the fact that even as you get older, you're not capable of doing certain things because of an injury history or past injuries. I mean, having some humility in the fact that knowing that you need help and that you can actually use somebody else's opinion. And I'm like, the one thing I always tell guys is I'm writing this, it's not written in stone. Anything I write down to you is not written in stone. I want to talk about it. You tell me how you feel about it. Let's see what we can do with it. All I want you to do is try. You let me know what doesn't go well, what does go well. I usually write in 4-week segments specifically for that reason. I'm not changing the entire plan. But if you don't feel great about front loading something and we can back load it, if you don't feel great about axial loading on that spine, we can do belt squatting, like that kind of stuff, is that being able to, enough humility to know that you have some limitations, that you can work on them and always get better and get back to it. But right now you have some limitations. Just because you're dead, like 315 would be an upper echelon deadlift of the entire population of people that you're working with. However, 600 pounds is an elite population that you're working with. So if you've been to the top, it's hard to sit there and look at yourself and say, man, I'm comfortable with deadlifting 315 because I know it's what I'm operational ready for right now.
Yeah. I mean, that's good. Aaron's bringing up really good points. And I think that has to tie in with the idea of, like, the funny thing is that if you see a 40-something-year-old woman, she looks at like a 20-something-year-old woman and she's envious of how that younger woman looks. As a 40-something-year-old man, I see like a 20-something-year-old man. I'm like, I wish I felt like that guy. And the bottom line is that, I mean, and I've also like not been operational the past, 15 years. So I don't have near as much damage as the guys who have been operational. And the bottom line is like when you're like me and Chuck and probably it's like from the time you're 22 to like 42, like mentally you think you're the same machine. But what happens is not the case. You have a lot of miles. And it's one of those things where that is a huge, like, kind of like humble pill to swallow, and being like, hey, I got miles on this machine. It's been used hard. I can't do the things that I used to do. And it's very, very frustrating. You know, I've experienced in the past like 4 years, it was like, hey, like, why do I get up after watching a movie and my fucking knees hurt? You know,
and everything cracks.
Like yeah, everything. It's like you make those old man sounds, you know, and it's very frustrating. And
but officers don't have it. They can't ever have that humility to understand that the machine that they were are not the machine.
But, I mean, it's like once you cross that like 38, 39, 40 threshold, and then you start feeling it, it's like it's frustrating. So you have to understand, you're like, okay, hey, what is my job? What is required of me physically, and can I do it? And then, like, what are the methods I can use to ensure that I can do my job at the highest level? Like, I mean, for example, me, I'm not in the military anymore. The only thing physically demanding is like my backcountry elk hunts. And so anytime I look at something, I go, oh, I want to get in there with the young guys and like throw down. It's like, well, I mean, does snatching 225 really kill more elk? Like, absolutely not. It doesn't, you know, but like if I can walk up a mountain faster with a pack on and be less fatigued, then there's a chance I could kill more elk, you know? And so you have to really
test where you throw the 45-pound pack on, you're like, okay, I'm going to run around this track. I'm going to keep my heart rate at 145, and it's going to be this ridiculous pace.
What's that?
So my guys, when they came down there, they're like, oh, okay, Jake did this test where he threw this 45-pound ruck on, and you were at a track, and he's like, all right, look, I'm going to keep my heart rate between 145 and 150. And I went to X amount of laps, and I'm going to come back, and they're like, yep, I kept like a 9-minute pace. And then you gave this whole diatribe about how that's how you train with RPE, and they're like, man, what the hell? That just suck.
Oh man, it was those guys were so blown away by training like in an aerobic zone. It was one of those like sent them out, and they came back, and it was okay, like hey man, just letting you know, like intensity, you know, dictates the type of adaptation. So like if you want an aerobic adaptation, you're gonna have to be like in this certain zone. And they were so frustrated. They were out there like walking, like, fuck, man. I go, I'm sorry, man. If you're at like 175, you're not training aerobic. Like, yeah, I'm sorry. Like, that's you know, it may feel easy, but the bottom line is you're not like developing that energy system, you know, and that's a common thing. But the thing is, I think because people are so focused on the short term and microcycles and daily design, is that they'll go do something and they're not patient enough to see what results from, you know, the full process. And so if you think of a traditional endurance model of building a base and being like, okay, let's just use the example of running distance and pace per mile. You know, we have athletes that start off, they're at 12 or 13 minute mile to stay in zone 2. And then 6 to 8 weeks later, it's an 11-minute mile. And then, you know, 10 to 12 weeks later, it's a 10-minute mile. And then another 4 weeks later, it's like down to like a 9:30. So all of a sudden you're essentially getting, you know, a higher miles per gallon. You know, your output is the same. You're running, let's just say 150 beats per minute, but what was originally 12, then went to 11, then went to 10, then went to 9:30. And so you're basically harnessing and teaching your body to use a much more efficient energy system. And it's not cool, it's not fun, but the bottom line is it works. I mean, every endurance book in the world is driven at this idea of building
it takes consistency there, right?
And you have to do it. And the downside is, like, unlike strength, like you do maximal strength training, like you go and do heavy deads, heavy back squats, like you need a couple of days to recover. Thing is with it, like aerobic work, it's like, hey, Monday, 30 minutes of aerobic work. Tuesday, hour of aerobic work. Wednesday, you know, 30 minutes of aerobic work. It's like the frequency is so much higher because the intensity is lower. And it's like, dude, I'm just so tired of this, you know? And so that's why we use tire drags and bikes. And I go back to the idea of putting the cauliflower and the mashed potatoes. We kind of trick people. We're like, okay, hey, you're going to, like, you know, ride the bike for 1,000 meters, and then you're going to do like 5 body weight get-ups, and then you're going to do 10 kettlebell swings, and then you get back on the bike. Oh, okay, that's cool. And hey, we want you to talk to the guy next to you, because if you're talking to the guy next to you, we're ensuring that you're in the right heart rate zone. We don't tell them like these constraints, we just kind of trick them into doing it. And like otherwise, if we just said, hey, come to the gym and do 60 minutes single mode of choice at 55 to 75% of max heart rate, they're like, fuck you, I'm not coming. Like they're gonna go do something else, So
hey, so circling back, we don't have a ton more time this evening, but I wanted to circle back on a couple of topics. Back to selection. So Aaron and Jake, what is your guys' expert advice to our listeners on recovering after selection? And I think if you if Chuck talked about his selection story, or mine, just going to the Special Forces assessment selection, you're pretty broken down. You've been sleep deprived, you've been food deprived for a period of time. Your body is exhausted. You're hurt, bumps and bruises. What's your guys' advice on recovering post-selection and getting back either to that point where you were, or just getting back to being healthy or healthier?
Multiple weeks of mobility.
Okay.
So I would tell you, I would give you a 4 to 6 week program that's body weight and mobility work. And it's going to be mobility for hips, ankles, shoulders, all the good stuff. That's quadruped exercises, anything that you can do, thoracic mobility. Just basically, you can't stop working out for these guys, and it's not going to be an option. They're going to want to start again.
And they have to, because if you're selection for us, you're going to have to come to the basic leader course.
And that's going to be so, like with the scheduling of after selections and certain selections, you don't have the choice. It's not ideal. You take as much time as you can. What I would tell you is that the first thing I tell people is that don't go back to the training program. Just pick it up from the last you left off, because you're not the same guy.
Yep.
You're literally not the same human being as when you left that. So if you're pulling 400 pounds and you go back and you're trying to start that same exact program back again, you're going to hurt yourself. And you're way better off as far as going through different courses, being able to actually finish the course healthy, than trying to get back to that elite level status you were before you went back there. So that amount of actual mobility work, you're going to have to wean yourself back into normal food. So going back into this, you're not used to, if you go back and you got your 12 pack and your pizza, that thing is going to mess you up GI wise quite a bit. I mean, you just completed a lot of stuff. You succeeded going through the stuff. It's going to be hard not to do that kind of stuff. I'm not saying don't, you're not going to, but it's not going to really help you that much. But being able to go with that mobility, being able to kind of get in there, still actually maintain your movement, because you will tighten up, and that'll be the biggest thing, is you start changing your gait, you'll start changing your running patterns and your movement patterns and all that stuff with the injuries, depending on how much you suffer during that process of actual selection.
No, great input. And is this happening the day after you get back? I mean, essentially, you're going to go in that hibernation phase where you're probably going to take a nap, sleep, refit, clean your equipment, unpack, get back to your home station. If you're coming, temporary duty out to Fort Bragg, for example, you'll get back, and is that kind of
I would
day
give
or
it,
two afterwards?
Yeah, I would give it a couple of days. I would
Okay.
also tell you that I get a lot of opinions on some of the and I've gotten this question more than once, just depending on working with different tactical athletes, is that we go back and we have mandatory unit PT. You can't stop mandatory unit PT. What I would tell you is you already succeeded. You've been selected. You don't have to be first. You just need to finish. So you can't tell them, I'm going to waive off of this PT that you guys want me to do. I'm not going to do the run this morning. But you don't, I know you're probably the best guy in your unit, and you're expected to finish in the top 1, 2, 3, whatever it may be, because you got selected. So there was a reason why. So I would tell you, you have to be, again, humble enough to know that I've already won. I don't need to be first. I need to make sure that I'm healthy. So, you can't stop some training, but yeah, just as much mobility. Take your time. Don't rush it. You have much more chance of hurting yourself than helping yourself in that 2-3 week span post.
Great input. Jake, over to you, man.
I mean, that's perfect. I mean, you think about the idea of, Chuck was talking about the 4 Ps, purpose and periodization, right? Like you look at periodization, you're either trying to build fitness, maintain it, or recover, right? That's a very standard process for any endurance athlete. You look at their calendar training year. You go to selection and you make it, you transition into recovery. And so your goal is to get your body back to its normal working state. You've passed the test. You've gotten picked up. Your goal is rest, nutrition, hydration, getting your body back to where it's operational. That is the goal. And unfortunately, just with any military, is like you're not in control of your schedule or when the class starts or when you're going to go to Q course. You don't know. It could be 3-4 months. It could be like, hey, you're leaving in 7 days because it's a slot and you're going. So the main idea is recovery. You're in a recovery phase. You did something hard. Now, obviously, the higher your level of fitness and the more accustomed to volume you were, you might not need as much recovery as someone who went in there who was less fit. So it's going to be super individual. Like if someone came from a triathlon or like an ultra endurance background, going to selection might not be that hard. If you just came from a normal life and went to selection, like you might be completely destroyed afterwards. So yeah, the goal would be to recover. That's the main goal. And then as soon as you recover, whether that's anywhere from 7 to 14 to 21 days, then start the training process. You start back at lower volumes, lower intensities, and you start trying to rebuild the machine.
Well put.
So really, I think the common theme is just kind of checking your ego and training for a purpose and ensuring it's feasibly progressive to meet your end state, not doing workouts, but doing training and not doing random acts.
Let's be real. Special Forces, SEALs, Ranger Regiment does not attract a lot of beta males. So like you have to understand that like these guys are coming.
We attract them, they just don't make it.
Exactly. Or they don't actually even get to the threshold. They talk about it, but they don't get there.
Bobby's the exception. He made it. He was the first group.
Yeah, Bobby.
You're killing me.
So, you're going to have guys who don't want to look weak. They don't want to show weakness. They want to always be on top, especially if they're a top performer. And the bottom line is you gotta pick and choose like when the time to shine is. And the time to shine is when you're being assessed. Hey, like if I'm in selection, what's my goal? To get selected. I got selected. Okay. Now, if you're in a transitionary period before you go to the queue and you're not being assessed, it's like, hey, you don't have to be first. You don't have to be first. You can be in the middle of the pack and put yourself in cruise control and let those, whether it's younger or more fit guys, go up there and crush it. So
you don't have to be number one all the time. It's not the thing.
Well, if you're not first, you're last.
No, that's just him because he was in first group. Then come on, even you, Jake, not an SF guy. If you had to rank all the groups as
all right,
alpha male to beta male,
we're gonna do this. All right.
I'm not gonna pick sides, Chuck. Not picking sides.
Damn it! All right.
I would tell you.
Well put. You're totally invited back on.
One of the woods that I would tell you is I actually had a discussion with the guy about this, is talking about his push-up scores, and he had shoulder issues.
He was probably a third grouper.
And I told the guy, you realize how much you pull directly affects how much you push. So the more weight you can pull towards you, the more weight you can push against you. It's directly correlational. It blew his mind. So what I would tell you is the same concept of things of the more mobile you are, the more weight you can displace. That's why gymnasts are strong. Like some of the strongest human beings on the planet. That's because
they're not very big, right?
No, they're not. They're 5'8", maybe average height, 5'6". They're
compact, explosive.
And they're yoked. Like it's everything that you want, kind of the visual that you want to be. But like just because you're doing mobility doesn't mean you're not getting better.
Yeah. Yep.
The thing
longevity too. You get those later years. You get 15 years in. It's like at this point, I'm not trying to set PRs for myself. It's like, hey man, I just want to like stay where I'm at as long as I can. So, and don't let fucking David Goggins fuck with your head and do stupid shit, right? Like you have to understand, like there's a difference of like pushing yourself when needing to be pushed, and that's very different than just being stupid and like running yourself into the ground for no reason and like incurring stress fractures. Like you do have to listen to your body. Like there's a certain point, like if you're in selection and you're doing your final ruck, it's like, hey man, I gotta do this no matter what. I don't care how bad it hurts. But if you're like, through you're on week 4 of Aaron's 16-week training cycle and something doesn't feel right, you need to stop and ask Aaron, like, hey, like this hurts, like what's going on? You might need to go see a physical therapist. Like there's a time and place to push through pain, and there's a time and place where pushing through pain is going to potentially cost you your ultimate purpose. And I think there's these Instagram fucking influencers out there who are saying you got to run until your feet bleed and your bones break and all this kind of nonsense. It's like the bottom line is, man, it's like your body is like a car, And it's like, if you start breaking axles, popping tires, all that, it's like, it doesn't matter how tough you are. Like, the bottom line is the machine's broken, and you may want to drive it, but you won't be able to. So you have to be smart when you're training. Training is not assessing.
I'll tell you too, from what Jake just said right there, real quick, if stop watching Instagram or TikTok or whatever the hell else that stuff is, read a book. Like, I don't care what you learn on Instagram. Odds are good that you reading a book, you're going to get more out of it. I don't care what kind of book you're reading. Read a book on mental performance. The obstacle is the way. The captain's
from a
class.
SEAL.
Honestly, at some points, like, I know Goggins has a book. I'm not trying to say every book is great, but I can tell you
And he's
right
a
now.
tough man. I mean, he can't. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I'm not downtrodden that guy at all. Like, he's done way more with his life than I'm sure I've done with mine. But if you're just listening to Instagram people and you're listening to like people who don't have a basis, they're just popular because they tell you what you want to hear, go read a book, man. It doesn't have to be in physical training. Like I said, Captain's Class is a great book. The Obstacle is the Way, Ryan Holiday. Adam Grant's a good mental performance author. Like those guys. And then you could go, if you want to read like the super into it. And again, I'm a little bit more of a kanji guy. So if you're going to read back some of the stuff that's Louis Sims wrote, the Russian authors that were fitness experts, Mel Sis super training, like fundamental stuff that, I mean, if you're super into it, go read that stuff. Don't Instagram this thing up. Don't watch TikTok. Go read a book.
Yeah, the thing is, a lot of the social media guys, like, so for every guy who succeeds doing something like that, the question I ask is, how many failed and broke themselves because of it? Right? So it's like, you don't hear about those guys because they never became anything. So if one guy does A, B, and C and it worked out for him, the question you need to ask yourself is, how many did A, B, and C and utterly failed? And it's a lot more people than failed than succeeded. So if one person did, some crazy, like, I mean, I remember I had Todd, one of my business partners, decided to try the Bulgarian method and 1 rep max to squat every single day. Right. And so, because he read about it and was like, this sounds cool, let's try it. And like, dude, he fucked himself up all kinds of ways. Right. And so what happens is, like, you'll read something from someone who did something, who became successful, and you'll think like, oh, well, this guy was successful, so maybe I should try it. But he was an anomaly, or there was a rare set of circumstances that allowed him to succeed with that. That does not mean it's appropriate for 80 to 90% of the population out there. So you have to be mindful. Just because so-and-so does this in the NFL does not mean that you can do it.
No, you're exactly right. And I think that it kind of ties back into those the 4 Ps that you were saying, but really that purpose, for example. What's the end state, the goal? All right, so Aaron Kraft and Jake Saenz want to kind of see if you got any closing comments.
Well, I'll say with these two, like, everything they're saying, like, they can get far more nerdy than this. I've talked to these guys and they're like talking about, oh no, this is mitochondria, this is mitochondrial density, or let's talk about lactate threshold in regards to everything we're talking about here. So this is just getting to the surface of the knowledge that they have on how to make accomplishments or reach your goals physically and mentally, really. So I'd say if you get a chance, like, reach out to both the gentlemen. We'll give you the means to reach out to both of them, even though we got to keep Aaron's kind of on the down low. But the knowledge is out there. Read a book, like Aaron said, or reach out to people that know what they're talking about. Don't just go with the Instagram guys. But there's a lot of science behind just the way the body works, right? That can't be really, like, argued with, right? It's just what it is. Like volume and intensity, how the body works for aerobic capacity. What is lactate threshold? What is VO2 max? It's just what it is, right? Am I wrong about that?
No, you can't argue with science in certain things. Like, there's some things you can manipulate, but science is there's a basic thing that comes along with it. Like, the body responds in certain ways, hormone responses are certain ways. It's been proven certain things. Studies are always behind what the latest progressions are in the most elite levels. But like any other profession, they're going to be behind because there's only so much you can do with the study and get approved to actually look at. So there's some fundamental things that can't change.
And that's why they send, like, the guys with certain attributes to 3rd Special Forces Group, right? Because they know.
Not comment on this.
that was probably
just continue to try to pry over there.
Yeah, that was the best sentence probably in the whole podcast. You cannot argue with science, right? Like, me and Aaron are not trying to push some fucking hidden agenda or some special products, right? Like, science is science, and there's plenty of studies out there, and the world's best coaches use certain principles. The best strength coaches, the best in powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting and in the NFL and other things, And the best endurance coaches, they all use very, very similar protocols. And those are backed by science and they work. And then the question is, how do coaches like myself and Aaron take those principles and put them together appropriate for an individual, or for, if it's a cookie cutter program, for the majority of individuals? You're always going to have outliers, but typically if you write a smart program, it's going to work for 8 out of 10 people. The big thing is, like, I mean, you can literally, if you just went and read like The New Alpinism by Scott Johnson and Starting Strength, and then like maybe The Supple Leopard, if you read those 3 books, you would already be way ahead of the vast majority of people out there. So just stop watching Instagram, go read a few books, right? Make some notes, find a coach who's knowledgeable. Obviously, you know, guys like Aaron work with people. You know, we have programs that just a little bit of knowledge will go a long way, and a little bit of planning will go a really long way.
But The New Alpinism is probably the book you recommend to anybody to read, correct?
I mean, this is a great book because I think there's so many similarities between mountaineering and mountaineer type athletes. You know, like basically they're doing what, you know, military guys have to do. They have to move over uneven terrain under load, right? And so they're carrying climbing equipment, they're carrying multi-days, food, water, supplies, whatever. And like the methodology they use, it's the same methodology that triathletes use and ultra runners and all that. The only difference is there is a little bit of an added component of going over uneven terrain and having external load, which is real similar, I think, to the soldier. The soldier is never going to be operating in his, you know, Ranger panties, t-shirt, and tennis shoes. He's always going to have a rifle, potentially an assault pack, probably body armor. So he's always looking at 25 to 35 pounds at the lightest, you know, and then upwards of 70 to 100 pounds on the heavy side. So having that ability basically just to move over ground. You don't have to do push-ups in combat. You don't have to do pull-ups in combat, but you know what? You have to move you and your equipment over ground, and you have to pick up heavy objects potentially and drag heavy objects potentially to be successful. And if you look at those things, I mean, I think that book also really, I mean, Aaron's a CSCS as well. So he's read the NSCA's book on that. And it's like, I mean, if people sat down and read it, it's like reading the Ranger Handbook, the fastest way to go to sleep. You know, you're going to look at it and be like 10 minutes later, you're like, I'm ready to rack out. Right. But The New Alpinism is nice because the guy's a really high level cross-country ski coach, Olympic level. And then he also presents the information in a really easy to digest way. So for guys who are kind of like, I don't know about this whole, like, you know, low intensity stuff, it's a good book and it will provide really clear examples on it. And then the strength books are out there, 531. I mean, he mentioned Super Training. That's a book that'll put you to sleep as well. Like, that's like, you have to be pretty damn motivated to grind through that one. So the knowledge is out there. You just got to spend the time to research it and learn it and apply it, and not sit on the shitter and look at Instagram videos of some guy who just got lucky and made it.
I would say dead on. But one of the things I would tell you too is just, if you want to read, and there are, I mean, my advisor in grad school edited the last NSCA edition of the Essentials book. So I was like, if you really got to want to read that book, but if you got to know where you want to start your education. If you want to start your education, the physiology of it, you want to look at the anatomy, then start at the NSCA book, because you can get a lot of the physiology, you can get a lot of the anatomy. It's going to be a lot of the boring stuff for a lot of people. If that's what you're interested in, start there. If you want to be more specific, they're going to give you some of the background stuff in a lot of the books they talk about. They're just not going to give you as much detail as you would get in those books. So just to kind of know how much you actually want to know about it. Do you want to get in real detail? Do you just want to make sure that you know the correct philosophies from a trusted person that you want to actually implement in your life? So, I mean, like, you can read it, you know, whichever way you want to go with it. The one thing I'll tell you, the later you get in your career, and we have a lot of discussions, is the physical training books are the foundation. Then you go to the mental training books. It becomes 70-30 mental. Your body's going to give up before your mind. Your mind is going to make your body give up before it needs to. So if you can handle, like, the books where you're talking about leadership, and the books that you're talking about resolve and how do you deal with hardships and all that kind of stuff, they're global concepts, but some of those books I would tell you to read too. And I mean, some of the authors, it just depends on your flavor or what you like to actually read about and what appeals to you. I'm much more of a stoicism guy, so like Ryan Holiday books.
Oh, we've talked about some of this. Oh, yeah.
So those are the ones that I get in the captain's class. Is something my wife turned me on to. If you want to read an engaging book, I listen to it on Audible. If you want to read an engaging book, it's about sports. Like the Bulls are on. It's about different teams. they went into who's the most important person as far as is the actual leader, is it who's the actual leader of the team relative to the most important person, that kind of stuff. So I mean, like, read all kinds of stuff. Like, I didn't get turned on to that till later in my career, and I think that's helped me more as far as strength gains than anything I've ever done. I'm right now, well, at least I was in the last 2 years, probably the strongest I've ever been in my entire life. And it's been mostly of the fact that I've learned that no longer is it okay just to look at one side. You got to look at more than one side. Diet, mental health, and physical.
Yeah, I know Jake would probably recommend, if you, for the mental health part, read something about the Luna Wolves, right, Jake?
Oh, what?
About the Luna Wolves?
Oh, the best part about hanging out with Chuck was when I was like, "Oh, I saw pictures of your." I was talking to his son. I saw pictures of your figurines, and he just looks at Chuck and like, Chuck looks at me. He goes, "Those are my figurines." Oh, that was great. That was great.
But you've read some Luna Wolves books, have you not?
I do like those books. I do like them. They're good. And plus that whole Start Days like short series on YouTube. I mean, that's so gangster. It's so great. If you haven't watched it, it's definitely worth 15 minutes of your time. Some kid's college creation based on the books. It's awesome.
I honestly, this is not the guy you want to listen to.
You're like, what? What are we talking about here? Now, it's all about being like physically superior and mentally superior, right? To your enemies.
Yeah.
Not the guy you want to listen to, but I'm a huge fan of fucking CT Fletcher. I love listening to that guy giving motive. If you haven't watched CT Fletcher, he's the I command you to grow guy. He's old now, had multiple heart attacks. Love CT Fletcher. He's by far not the guy you want to listen to.
Fletcher's great, man.
I love him.
This has been a incredibly insightful discussion. Again, looking at the physiology, the physicality, and really just diving into what our special operations people should be, can be doing, and resources available to them in preparation to going to one of our selections or a selection in general, which I think Jake put it so nicely, the interview process to come and join special operations. So closing comments from the group?
I say what Aaron said, can't argue with science.
I would tell you to go find someone who's done it and talk to them about it in person, not on the phone, not over email. If you can find someone who's done it, go talk to them and see how it happened, what their experience was like, and then build on that.
Great input. Absolutely great advice. So again, Aaron Kraft and Jake Saenz, thank you guys so much for your time joining us here at the Falcon Snail Pub. Absolute pleasure having you guys on, and we look forward to chatting again soon, gents. Really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us today in Pineland Underground, the U.S. Army John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and Schools official podcast.
Please tune in to our next episode. We release episodes every 2 weeks.
You can reach us at pinelandunderground@gmail.com. Check it out.